You're listening to the 40 Fit Radio podcast, dedicated to the 40-plus community. Join us as we discuss the truth about fitness and health using science, reason, and the experiences of our host and content experts. Welcome to the 40 Fit Nation. Hey, welcome back to the 40 Fit Radio, and welcome back to the 40 Fit Nation. I'm here with Coach Trent.
Morning. We are hot and live.
We are hot and live. That is our new lead-in. We're hot and live. We've gone hot and we've gone live. So today we're going to talk about the bench press. This, we've talked about in the last 3 episodes, we've talked about the compound lifts, and we've really focused on what we call the big 3. The mother of all lifts, the father of all lifts. Is there? No. Yeah.
Holy
we
Trinity.
Call the squat the mother of all lifts, but really it is the father of all lifts. And then we could say the deadlift is the mother of all lifts, and we could say that the press is the child of all lifts. So what is the bench press? I would say it's the cousin of all lifts.
The redheaded stepchild.
Ha! Ha! That's what happens when you get old, guys. When you get over 50, you have to clear your throat on a regular basis. So, yeah, the bench press, it's very important lift. Important to, especially when it's related to sporting events that require a push or more upper body mass. A great example would be if you're an offensive or defensive lineman and you're not bench pressing, you're missing the mark because you have to build a big chest, a big push.
Although,
and so
I love it when coaches argue. They're like, well, when are you going to get on a bench and push against somebody on the field?
Yeah. But, a lot of, that's true too, or at least in our world. But, a lot of coaches in the sports-specific world, in football and some of the pushing sports, they really focus on the bench press as part of the lifting scheme in their programming. And so, we in our gyms, as starting strength coach, and then also just a general coach, we don't focus on the bench as much. And if given an option to either press or bench, with an older client, definitely I would press before I would bench.
Yeah. Because
I think the ability to lift a load from shoulder height to overhead is more important than to be able to push it away from you.
Right.
I think you can develop other muscle groups. I mean, when you're pressing, you're still developing your pushers. You're still developing the upper chest and the shoulder, the deltoid complex and shoulder complex and the triceps and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you go back and look at the very earliest barbell lifters, guys like Eugene Sandow. So we got a painting of Sandow.
Before Christ?
The BC. Yeah. It's BS. Before Sandow.
Before Sandow. Okay.
And after Sandow. Yeah.
There we go.
We've got a painting of this dude hanging in our bathroom here at Fort Worth Strength. And the guy's
kind of awkward because it's right there by the toilet.
Yeah, he's just watching you. and his like he's got like a yellow unitard on.
I mean, as an old guy, it's hard enough to get things rolling and see what you do.
You got to watch this guy pressing.
Yeah, you got to watch this guy press while he watches you.
I mean, he is pressing a bar with 2 human males in each end. Yeah. So it's pretty impressive.
He should have had women in the. But I know that's a sexist remark, but. Roll with me here.
Yeah.
He should have had women in the dumbbell things.
Well, hey, Sandow was the consummate entrepreneur because apparently he would hold private showings after his exhibitions where women could touch his muscles
and touch him
for a fee.
Mm-hmm. Little sideline business for you there, Trent.
But anyway. So, but here's the thing.
I would have to actually pay women to touch me.
You got to go the other way.
When you get older.
You got to go make money so you can pay. I see.
That's what happens.
I see.
Yeah.
I need to go audit this ladies class that you coach.
Yes, audit it. Right. Yeah, it's perfect. Audit it. Yeah. We're not doing any, promise you. We're not doing anything like my wife's in that class.
So, but I think the thing here is that it's interesting. You go back to the earliest barbell lifters, and a lot of these guys were big pressers and not necessarily big benchers. And some of that is due to the fact that the bench press hadn't been invented yet. Right. Yeah. But these guys recognize the benefits early on of pressing a bar overhead, the longer kinetic chain, the more direct carry over to real life. So we have to ask ourselves, why bench press at all then? And as you said, that's not a necessity, but I think one of the reasons we bench press is because it can help us drive the press because we have a better mechanical efficiency over the bar when we're laying on a bench and we're angling our arms and we're creating an angle of attack, if you will, of our pecs
Sure.
to press the bar and ultimately use more weight than we can overhead. Because we all know the press stops pretty early. We run into plateaus pretty early, so we may not be handling a whole lot of weight in our hands with the press to start with.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, like we talked about, the bench press can be hard on older shoulders because of the position, because of the fact that a lot of people, both males and females, who bench press don't position their hands correctly on the bar, and the bar path is not correct. The bar is too high on the chest. The elbows are too high in relationship to their shoulders. The elbows are almost at the same level. If someone is lying, so let's get a frame of reference here. Obviously, the bench press, you're lying on your back on a bench, okay? So we're going to use that as our positional frame of reference. You're lying on your back, looking at the ceiling, and the bar is overhead, obviously, or above you, okay? So when I say that the elbows are too high, what I really mean is if you were lying on your back and I told you to raise your arms out to your side, okay? If you were standing, you would just raise them out to your side and you would look like a cross or a T or whatever you want to call it, okay? But when you're lying on your back, when you raise your arms out to the side, you look like a T again, but I'm looking down on you. When your elbows get too close to the shoulder height, equal to the shoulder height, okay? We call that position abduction of the shoulder, abduction, ABD.
AB away means away from.
I always used to use this example. If you adduct, you add something to you. You bring it close to you.
Right.
If you abduct, you abuse it. You push it away.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So abduction is the arm going away from you, and adduction is the arm coming towards you. Okay, same with the leg, thigh, whatever. If you're doing abduction, adduction of the hip. So if the elbow is too high in relationship to the shoulder, then it puts the shoulders at risk for impingement. And impingement is that concept where the stuff that's in between the two bones, the humerus, the ball of the joint, and the acromion, the roof of the joint that overlays that, that's above that, the rotator cuff tendons and all those things we hear about, the bursa, when we get bursitis and all those things, it basically just gets impinged or pinched. There's not enough room for them to do their work, and they get pinched. So you can get impingement syndrome, and then you can get inflammation, and then you can get scarring, and then you get what we call tendonitis, and then you get what we call tendinosis, and then you eventually get a tendinopathy, which is a potential tear of those structures. And that's what we call the rotator cuff tear. The rotator cuff is not one structure. It's 4 different tendons that attach into the humerus and control humerus or the bone positioning when you raise the arm up and move it around. So our number one goal is that when people lie down on the bench, they need to be doing this correctly, especially as an older lifter. And there's a lot of guys and a lot of ladies that just can't tolerate this motion.
Right.
I find experientially, both in my clinic and in the gym, that older individuals can tolerate the press before they can the bench press, which surprised me. It really surprised me as I began to use it more in practice. I would have thought that more people could tolerate the bench press than the press, because the press can be a booger for a lack of mobility and a lack of cuff stability and humeral, joint stability, but that's not the case. And I found that to be the case with me. I could still bench press some when I couldn't press overhead much anymore, when I tore my cuff. And so now, as a client gets older, there may be some modifications that we make. And, we just did a podcast. I just did a podcast with Barbell Logic on special populations. We talked about the older population. We gave some examples of things we might do or not do with the master's population. And one of those practical examples in this case is I might not bench press a person.
That's right.
I might just press them, but I might do push-ups. I might do weighted push-ups if they could tolerate a push-up or a weighted push-up instead. And so there's different modifications that we can make along the way, and it really relates to the individual. What does the individual need?
Right.
And so we don't exclude an exercise just because our model says to exclude it. In fact, if we have a model of anything, it's inclusion. All the exercises are applied to people equally, but we also recognize through experience that there's certain exercises or certain lifts that the older population just doesn't do as well with. And the bench seems to be one of those lifts.
Right.
And so, when we talk about the bench, we're going to talk a little bit about form today, but we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the accessory exercises, accessory lifts that we like to do, but we're going to hold that off for you guys.
Yeah.
And we're going to actually do a whole episode coming up next on the accessory lifts, the accessory movements, because we really feel like it needs that due. It needs that amount of time to talk about them because there's so many lifts that we add in. But definitely early on in the process, you and I have said, Trent, that we almost see the bench press as an accessory movement. It's, even though it's one of the prime movements, it's one that we could do without.
Right. So let's just kind of go back really quick to what we talked about when we did the episode covering the compound lifts in general a few episodes back. So one of our criteria for selecting an exercise is we want to use the most muscle mass, we use the most load or weight that we can over the greatest effective / safest range of motion, right?
Yeah.
And we do that to get stronger faster. So we're training for general strength here. So where does the bench press fit into that specifically? Well, we know we've got lots of range of motion with the press overhead, right?
Yeah.
And we know that's probably the greatest effective range of motion because we have a super long kinetic chain. The bar is all the way over our head and we're loaded all the way down to our toes.
Right. A lot of people would consider that range of motion just what's happening at the shoulder, but you and I look at the range of motion as the whole body is in compression.
Right.
And so you and I would look at it as, no, it's from the feet to the very tips of the fingers.
That's right.
Versus in the bench.
In the bench, we have a much, much shorter kinetic chain because we're going to take that bar out of the rack with our arms fully extended, and we're essentially loaded down to the shoulder because the bench itself is going to intercept the load from that point. Now, our feet are connected to the floor, and we are driving our feet, so there is some contact with the floor, but most of that weight is being intercepted by the bench. So the kinetic chain, in other words, the distance from full lockout all the way down to the floor, the end point is much shorter. So why do we use the bench? How does that fit into this criteria? Well, simply put, the bench allows us to move a lot more weight than we can on the press. And
recruiting more muscle mass, bigger muscle groups, the chest, the lats,
that's
shoulders,
right. We use
triceps,
more
arms.
pecs, more lats,
Legs.
two much bigger muscle groups than we do in the press.
Right.
So it can allow our other shoulder extensors, the delts and the triceps and the elbow, extensors, to handle more weight than they could with the press.
Yeah. It ends up being an assistive exercise almost. You can drive your press by your bench and you can drive your bench by your press, but probably your bench influences your press more than the other. Your bench will have a greater influence on your press than your press will on the bench.
That's right. That's right.
But they're very good to tag team too, because like you said earlier, we were talking about this, it allows you to have tension under load for time under load while you're giving some of those musculature that are more isolated in one movement or another a rest. So you would press on one day and then bench on the next day and then press on one day. And then the next week you might flip them. And this is the starting strength model of the ABA rotation for novice programming at least, and all the way up into intermediate and advanced programming. You would then flip them and you would have the bench at the first of the week, the press, and then the bench. And then you just keep rotating them. But you're still staying with a lot of time under load. But you're doing an alternate exercise, which like you said, one day you're doing an exercise or a movement, the press, which requires you to use a little less weight, quite a bit less weight.
Right.
And then another day you're using an upper body movement, the bench press, which allows you to use a lot more weight. And so, yeah, I like the bench. I've gotten back to benching since I had shoulder surgery 2 years ago in January. I had a 4-anchor cuff repair on my left shoulder. So for some of you old guys or ladies out there, I can relate to you. I couldn't bench for probably a year after I had my shoulder surgery. I was doing push-ups, but I could press, which again, and I use the press in the rehab process. I use a modification of the press that Rip actually created in the rehab process. And so, we use some other isolated movements, but we use a press progression. And so it's very possible that the bench is important, but it's not as important as I would say the press is. So like Trent was talking about, the bench does satisfy the 3 criteria that we like to use for compound lifts. But because we use a shorter range of motion, it allows us to use more weight. And one of the reasons for that is because versus the press, because that's going to be the comparison we're going to be making all throughout this episode, is that when you're standing upright and you're pressing overhead, yes, you're using your chest and you're using your lats and you're using your whole upper body, but not to the extent that you are when you're in the bench, just because of positioning to the load. The fact that you're lying on your stomach and the weight is directly over your chest highly recruits more of your pecs, your chest, your serratus anterior, your lats, and a lot of the anterior and posterior shoulder, and also the movers of the arm, the bicep and the tricep, the grip. Everything gets worked, and it gets worked. Those larger muscle groups get worked more just because of the physics of it, the positioning of it.
Right.
So do we want to go into form now?
Yeah. Yeah. So that, and the reason for that is larger muscle groups. And there's also the form that we use in the bench press puts those muscle groups into a position that is more mechanically efficient.
90-degree angle.
That's right.
We talk about it, and that becomes very technical.
Yeah. And so without going too far down the rabbit hole, basically what I mean is that when we bench, we're going to create an arch in our back. And we're going to do that by pulling our shoulder blades together, tucking them in tight together, pinching them together, and then raising our chest up, and then driving our feet through the floor back towards our shoulders. And what this does is it creates kind of like a bridge, effectively. So if we imagine the 2 points of the arch bridge are going to be your shoulder blades and your butt, right? And if we do what we can to make those 2 points come closer together, we create a higher arch.
Right.
And the effect of when we create that arch is that it takes our pec angle relative to the bench and it makes it more steep. So closer and closer to 90 degrees, as you said.
Right.
And the closer that pec angle becomes, the more the easier it can contract and drive the bar up off of your chest.
Right.
So we're creating mechanical efficiency with the technique, which allows us to handle heavier loads, allows us to activate more muscle mass.
Right. And the goal is to, bench pressers, professional bench pressers, guys and ladies that only do the bench press in meets, they've perfected this movement over the years.
Right.
And I have to give credit where credit's due here. When we talk about the compound lifts, when Trent and I have had these conversations about all these different lifts we've talked about so far, we're using a model that we learned from Starting Strength.
Right.
And where there's not a whole lot of variance from what we learned from Starting Strength in regards to what we're teaching to our audience. And it's not because we're disciples or I'm brainwashed by Starting Strength. It's that I've figured out through not only studying the model, through reading Rip's book, and through using the model in practice in the rehab setting, and then also using it in the gym, that it works. And that's why we're promoting this method. So I want to give credit where credit's due. The way we teach the bench is the Starting Strength model.
That's right.
For the bench and the other lifts also.
Right. So you bring up a good point there, right? So you mentioned professional bench pressers, and if you've watched any bench videos of power lifters, you might see what looks like a crazy technique, and you might see a huge arch. I mean, it looks like their spine's going to just, it's like it's bent in half almost, and a really, really wide grip. And this is very important. Power lifters are specifically trying to lift as much weight as possible. That's the sport, right? That's the goal of the sport. Whereas what we're saying with this technique that we're using the bench press, we're training for general strength.
Right.
So lifting the most weight possible is that's only one criteria.
Right.
We also said safest/greatest effective range of motion. Right. So we're not trying to play games to lift as much weight as possible. We're trying to use as much weight as we can with the best or most efficient and safest range of motion.
Right.
And that means that we're going to take an arch that is reasonable, and that is going to be limited by your specific thoracic mobility, the ability to squeeze your chest up into that arch position. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, if you were an ex-gymnast and you're female, you can probably bend over backwards and touch your head to your heels, or something, or do a back arch, do a back walkover or something like that. But yeah, the other thing to recognize here too is that so we get several things by arching that big back, keeping the hips and the shoulders down on the mat. We get several things achieved. Number one, Trent said, we recruit more muscle mass. Number two, we change the tie-in position. In other words, where the tendon of the pec is tying into the humerus becomes more 90 degrees-ish, which helps us in regards to stabilizing that bone when the bar comes down and up. We also change the lat tie-in, the latissimus, the big muscle of the back, the cobra of the back. It also becomes more 90 degrees-ish and helps those two muscles. Those are the big stabilizers. Those are the big movers of the bench press, the chest and the lat. The other muscles, the tricep, the bicep, the shoulder musculature are stable, are more fine-tuned movers, but those are the two big movers. The last thing that by getting that big arch that we do is we shorten the distance.
Yes, yeah.
And like you're saying, that works great for a competitive power lifter to shorten that distance as far as possible, because that makes the bar have to move less distance to get more weight and to compete.
Right.
But for our purposes, we want a reasonable arch so that we're shortening the distance, changing the muscle efficiency through physics, but also the best available range of motion, the most efficient available range of motion, because we need movement and we need time. We need more time under load or under tension, and so we're just finding a common ground there.
That's right. That's right. So and there's one other piece to this, right? Because we say safest effective range of motion, when you create that arch position, I always show this to my clients. I have them stand up and look at me face on, and I say this like, okay, I'm going to pretend like I'm laying down on the bench and I'm standing straight up. I put my arms straight out in front of me, and I would say, okay, if my back was totally flat on the bench, in other words, no arch, and I drop my hands to my shoulders, right, then what kind of angle has my elbow created to my torso? It's almost 90 degrees, right? We just said at the beginning of the episode, that's bad, right? We run risk of impingement. We don't want that. Now what I do is I squeeze my chest up, I pull my shoulder blades together, I create that big arch, and then I drop my hands down towards my chest. What happens now? Naturally, the elbows they abduct to a safe position. So when you create the arch, you don't have to think about your elbows. You just think about the arch, and it automatically puts your elbows into the right spot, into a safe and mechanically efficient spot. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone. Yeah, no, just by performing the right technique, you're improving the form model. You're improving when you say safe and effective, you're improving the physics of it, which improves the joint function. That's right. Which makes it less likely that you're going to hurt your shoulders. Right. And that's the big thing with the bench, is hurting your shoulders with the older population, the masters population. So let's real quickly go through the basic form of the bench. So before you get ready to lie down on the bench, first thing you're going to do is you're going to set the rack height, the hooks on the rack at a height to where you can just be in a position to where if you're laying on your back and you go to press the bar with full elbow lockout, the arms locked out of the rack, that you got probably about 6 inches of play there. You don't need a whole lot more of play than that. You just need the rack height to be at a level to where when you're lying down and you go to press the bar out of the rack against the rack standards, the uprights, that you've got about 6 inches of play. That allows you to get back into the rack easily and come out of the rack easily. There are two safety things that we always emphasize on the bench, because this may save your life. That's right. And I'm serious about that, guys. You can talk to a lot of strength coaches out there that have had clients hurt, injured, or even killed from the bench press. The bench press is really the only lift that, is probably going to kill you. The squat, if you're not careful, could hurt you badly. But the bench press is the lift that could literally kill you, and has injured and killed lifters and participants. So number one, never, ever collar the barbell sleeves. Never put collars on. Never. By not putting collars on, it allows you to, if you get stuck in the bottom of the range of motion and you don't have safeties, and you don't have a spotter, which, by the way, you should always have safety set or have a spotter. But let's say for some stupid reason you decide to do a 3-rep max. Or your spotter's goofing off. Or your spotter is,
AOL.
Yeah, right.
AOL.
AWOL.
Absent with the AWL. Absent without leave.
MIA. I don't know.
Whatever it is. He or she is gone. Then you can always tip the bar to one side, slide some weights off, and then it'll become very unstable. It'll automatically tip to the other side, slide the weights off, and you can get out from underneath it. Okay, that's the first safety rule. Second safety rule: in and out of the rack, never guide the bar, never aim the bar. It's the same with the squat and with the press. Never aim the bar. You're gonna when you go into full lockout, when you press the bar off your chest, and the elbows are locked. Okay, you're going to basically just slam that bar back into the standards, into the upright bars of the bench, okay, or the hooks if it's a traditional bench press.
Right.
The hooks, okay, but you're not going to aim it to those hooks. Elbows are locked coming out of the rack and going in the rack. And the reason for that is this. When you move that bar from the rack to over your chest, you're going over two very sensitive areas. Your head, okay, your face, and your neck.
I make a lot of money with this face.
I know you do.
I can't afford to. Yeah, that's the money maker over here.
This is the money maker.
Well, actually,
this is the money maker.
This is 40 Fit Radio, so really the money makers are throat, right?
Yeah, that's true. But for you it is. My voice is terrible, but you have a golden throat. But yeah, I mean, so that bar is moving over a very sensitive area, and the elbows need to be locked in what we call close pack position, so that you can control the bar. Okay,
right.
When you press the bar off your chest, you go full lockout again. Don't start to go back towards the rack to put it back into the rack when you're still trying to press up. That is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, all it takes is one wreck, and you can really screw your life up. Well, you'll see guys all the time on the bench, especially in commercial gyms. You'll see guys that can't quite lock the weight out.
Yeah.
And they just try to throw it back into the hooks with a bent elbow. Bad. You know, you might do it 100 times in a row or 500 times in a row just fine. But 501, once. That's all it takes is once. So
and then you end up. I mean, we had a client that was in Florida, and she was using a rack that was kind of in between her rack height and the rack height, and another rack height, and so she used it, and it was low. Well, it put her at a mechanical disadvantage when she went to go out of the rack, and she was doing a pretty heavy set of 3. She was doing 5 sets of 3. She's a much older client. When she pushed the bar out of the rack, she could not get her elbows locked, and she had already brought the bar over her face, which was a big mistake. And she recognizes that now. She's been taught otherwise. And when the bar basically just slowly lowered right to her forehead and her face, and she had to slide it off her forehead. It basically black and blued her entire face.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to scare you guys, but I just mean to say, follow safe principles always, even during the warm-ups.
That's right.
Practice the safety with no load. Practice good, safe. When you get done, if you're doing the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift that day, when you get done with squatting, take your collars and walk them back over to the weight rack and set them in the weight rack so they're not even close to the weight tree. I mean, so they're not close to your rack.
That's right.
Don't leave them at the rack, because inadvertently, without thinking, you'll just collar the weight.
Slide them on, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah. So let's talk about setting the safeties really quick. It's really easy. So if you've done this arch position that we've been talking about, then your chest raises up off of the bench when you make the arch. So you set your safeties such that when you lower the bar to your arched chest, you won't touch the safeties, right? You're just fine to bench. But if you couldn't get the bar to lock out and you had to bring it back down to your chest, you can deflate that arch until you're flat on the bench, and then the bar will just rest on the safety pins and you can crawl out. That's how you set your safeties.
Same with like the squat. When
That's
you're
right.
setting safeties on the squat, same concept applies there too. So we want to set the safeties. We want to come in and out of the rack with locked elbows, and we never want to collar the weight. Those are really key things.
That's right. Those two things will keep you safe. One other thing, just really quick, don't roll the bar. I've heard this called the roll of shame. You'll see some people, they miss a bench and they try to roll the bar down their torso to their thighs and then stand up with it. Guys, you've got a lot of organs and soft tissues in between your chest and rolling the bar down to your thighs. Do you really want to roll a 1-inch or bar of steel across those structures?
Yeah.
Probably not a good idea. Not a good idea. So just don't do that. Follow the
if you want
instructions.
early prostate surgery, that's a good way to do it.
Right. So, okay, I think we've scared everyone sufficiently into using safe techniques and protocol on the bench. So, where do we go from here?
All right, so let's just talk about what happens once we get on the bench. So, first thing is, and we're going to go through this fairly quickly because really, if you want to learn this technique, you need to either go to Starting Strength YouTube channel and pull up the bench press and watch that, or you need to read the book Starting Strength, the basic barbell method, so that you can actually learn the technique. Or more importantly, you probably need to hook up with a coach somewhere in your area, get a good barbell coach that knows this model. If you're going to use this model to train, which is what we do. So when you lay down on the bench, you've got your rack height set, you've got your bench set underneath it. It may be a fixed bench that's attached to the bench press, or it might be a free bench that you just slide underneath. When you lay down, you're going to have your body positioned as such so that when you look up at the ceiling, the bar is to the head side of your eyesight. In other words, it's just above your eyes. So if you could think about where the bar would be, it'd be almost at like your eyebrow height. Okay, it'd be almost at where your eyebrows are, or right above your eyebrows, where your kind of eyebrows are right there, and your forehead starts. So that's about where you should be positioned under the bar. So if you look up to the ceiling and the bar is down at your chin or at your nose or at your mouth, you're too far towards the head side or the rack side of the bar. You're too far back, and you're inherently going to hit the J-cups or the rack holders as you come up in the motion. And you have a tendency, it's just a poor position, okay, to come in and out of the rack. So that's the first thing. The second thing you have to understand about our bench press model, this bench press model is that, and Trent's already talked about it, the big chest position. Our number one goal to protect your shoulders is to use the shoulder against the bench as the weight-bearing model. I tell people the shoulder is the foot. The shoulder is the foot. Like in the press, the feet hold your weight.
Right.
In the squat, the feet hold your weight. I mean, your legs, your feet are on the ground. That's the contact point with the ground. In the deadlift, your feet are the contact point with the ground. Once you pull the bar up and you're in traction, then compression. Traction in the arms, compression in the rest of the body. Guess what? In the bench press, your shoulders are your feet. Even though you're driving with your legs to push the shoulders into the mat, the weight-bearing surface of the load against your body between the barbell lifter system is the shoulder.
Right.
And so if the shoulders are not squeezed back, like you're trying to crack an egg between your shoulder blades, get a big chest like you're trying to bow up against someone, if you're not arching that upper back and squeezing those shoulder blades back and down too, squeezing back and down, then you're not approximating or bringing those shoulder blades together to where your humerus, your actual bone of your shoulder, can sit on the bench almost. It's surprising, even a really big guy can squeeze. I mean, Trent's pretty wide through the shoulders. And when I watch Trent bench press, what happens is he'll squeeze his shoulder blades so far back in such a high arch that his shoulders are right at the edge on the bench.
Right.
And so that's our weight-bearing surface. So now it puts the shoulder, the scapula, the shoulder blade, and the humerus at a very stable position. You see, guys, a good bench press, you should not see a lot of shoulder movement.
That's right.
The shoulder, if you drove a pin, a spear, a pin, a stake, whatever, I almost think of like a shish kebab pin, or a shish kebab spear, through both shoulder joints, they should not move around. They should have a single access point almost, where the axis of rotation and movement is the same throughout the whole bench press, okay? So it stays squeezed back on the bench, and really all that's moving are your arms.
That's right.
Your arms are all that's moving. So once you position yourself, you get that big arch in your chest, okay? You lift the chest, you squeeze your shoulder blades back. You're going to reach up and grasp the bar, and you're going to grab the bar or grasp it, grip it, whatever you want to call it, at a width so that when you bring the bar down to your chest, okay, right almost at the xiphoid process, which is the bottom of your sternum, almost at nipple height on most people,
right.
Okay? When you bring the bar down to your chest, your arms should be at a 90-degree angle, both from the end of the bench, if I were to look at your body from your butt moving to your head, and from the side. Okay, so we want a vertical, perfectly vertical, 90-degree angle of the forearms, okay, the forearm of the shank, when you're at the touch point on the chest.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So you know that your grip is too narrow when you come down if you have this really acute, your elbows are flaring out and your forearms are angled inward towards your body. Or you're too wide if the elbows are flaring in and the forearms are going out. Where like one looks like a W and the other one looks like an A.
Yeah.
Too narrow, you look like an A. Too wide, you look like a W or a V. Okay? So that's how we determine our grip width.
Yep. An easy way to do that, if you're not sure and you're training by yourself, is put your thumbs at the beginning of the knurl. Put the tip of your thumbs at the beginning of the knurl, and then open your hand all the way. Spread your hand out as far as you can, and then take your grip. That will get you
it's a good start
in the ballpark. Now, if you're male, and especially if you're a bigger guy and you got wider shoulders, you're probably going to need to go wider than that. But for ladies or just more average sized guys, that might be right where you need to be.
Yeah.
So what Darren said, the landmark that we look for is the vertical forearm.
Yeah.
But that's a good way to kind of get you in the ballpark to start with. Okay. So we did the arch, and we already explained how the arch creates the correct shoulder or elbow position.
Right.
But there's one more component. We've got the feet.
Yeah.
We know inherently that the shoulders are the feet of the bench press because we can do a bench press.
That's your weight bearing surface. Yeah.
That's right. We could do a bench press with our feet up on top of the bench. We don't need them to actually contact the ground, but we like to because that helps us reinforce that arch position,
drive.
Right? Yeah, we call that the leg drive. Yeah. So when you plant your feet on the ground, you want to, most people I see that do this incorrectly have their feet too far away from them. Here's a telltale sign. If when you're benching, you've got happy feet, your feet are moving around a lot, or your feet are sliding out from under you, away from the bench, you probably started with your feet too far away from your body. Pull them back towards your shoulders more. And I like to push through the ball of my foot as opposed to the middle of my foot or my heels. Sure. Push through the ball of your foot and push back towards your shoulders, not up.
Right.
We're not driving our legs up. We're pushing it back towards the shoulders. And what that motion does, the leg drive, is that pushes your butt and your shoulders closer together, and it reinforces that arch position that you fought so hard to establish.
Yeah, pins you down into the bench with your shoulders. It drives your shoulders back and down into the bench, like we're driving them down to the ground, actually. The bar is driving your arms down. We want your shoulders to feel like they're being driven down into the bench. It gives you more weight bearing, more substantial purchase attachment to the bench. General rule of thumb, as a coach, I recommend people knees at 90 degrees. Knees at 90 degrees, hips open, feet out at about your squat stance. Okay, so feet out a little wider than narrower, and your toes slightly turned out, probably 20 to 30 degrees. Okay.
Yep.
So,
and you might feel that your hip flexors get really tight.
Yeah.
And they might even start to cramp a little bit after a heavy bench set. That's okay.
Right. Yeah.
That means that you're actually driving your legs.
Yeah. It'll also help your hip mobility. If you're tight in the hip flexors, it'll also help your hip mobility, being in this position regularly. So, all right. So here's the instructions. When you pull the bar out of the rack, the elbows lock. Before you pull the bar away from the standards on the rack, the elbows lock. You bring the bar directly over the shoulder joint, not the chest. It should be directly over the shoulder. If we looked at the body and we looked at you from the side, the arm should be at 90 degrees to the body, okay? At that point, you've got that big chest, okay? What you're going to do is you're going to look up to the ceiling, and you're going to look over the head side of the bar now. Not the foot side, but the head side of the bar. And you're going to find a spot on the ceiling that is just on the head side of the bar. You're going to look over the edge of the bar, which will be the head side of the edge of the bar. And you're going to find a spot on the ceiling that you can see right there over the edge of the bar. That is your return point. That is the point where you start and the point where you finish when you bring the bar back up off of your chest. When you press it, you bench press it up off your chest. So that's our starting point. okay? That's also our ending point, all right? From that point, we're going to take our breath, right? Get a Valsalva. We got that big arch. We're going to lower the bar eccentrically, okay? We're going to bring the bar to basically at our nipple height or right at the xiphoid process. The bottom of your sternum is a good starting point. Now, you may have to mess with that a little bit based on arm length, really short arms, really long arms, short torso, long torso, whatever. We can't really say nipple height works on everybody because some people's nipples are down at their waist. No, I'm just joking. I'm not referencing a gender there on that one. But nipple position changes, okay?
Right.
So really the bottom of your sternum right there, somewhere in that area. And when you bring the bar down, you know it's about the right position because the elbows should be at about 70 degrees from the side of the body, okay? At about 70 degrees up or abducted, raised up side of the body. 90 degrees would be you lying on the bench and the elbows are perfectly at a 90-degree angle. The arms are at a 90-degree angle to the trunk. Or standing up, you put your arms out perfectly to the side like a T or a cross. We don't want it there. We want to bring them down just a little bit to about 60 to 70 degrees.
That's right.
Okay? Now, a really close grip bench press would put you down more like at 45 or 30 degrees,
right,
where you're really isolating the triceps. But in standard bench press, that's the position. When we touch the chest, and we don't bounce off the chest, okay? We touch the chest, we immediately return the motion or change the direction, just like we do on the squat, and we get a little bit of a stretch reflex out of the shoulders. We big arch, drive the bar back up to our return point or our starting point, using that point on the ceiling that we talked about, okay? Using that guide, okay? And that should be right back over the shoulder. So the bench press is an arcing bar path. It's a bar path that starts at the shoulder, arcs down to the chest, and returns back to the shoulder in a curvy linear fashion, okay? It's not straight at all.
Yeah.
It's definitely arced.
And that's the key. You know, one thing that if you have trouble with the bar going away from you on the bench press, that probably means that you touched too low.
Yeah.
Because just like we say on the press, your elbow position will determine where your forearms are pointing, right? So we say on the press, we got to keep our elbows up, right? So that the bar moves up and then back over the midline, over our forehead.
Right.
Same thing applies to the bench press. If we look at you from the side, the point of your elbow should be slightly in front of the bar, because that's the point at which your forearms are going to be vertical, and you're going to press the bar up and then back over your shoulder joint. If your elbow gets behind the bar, then you're going to end up pushing the bar away from you, and that's an indication that typically happens when you touch too low or too close down towards your belly as opposed to at the sternum.
Right. No, good point. Good point.
So one thing also that you'll notice when you do a heavy set of 5 on the bench press is that you're going to have to breathe, right? When you are doing your warm-up sets, you might be able to do all 5 reps on one breath, or maybe you can do 2 or 3 reps on one breath. That's great. But when it gets heavy, you're going to have to breathe in between reps. And when you exhale at the top after locking out, that's when your shoulders are going to want to pull out of position because it's heavy and you're getting fatigued. So what I like to do is when you inhale at the top of the rep is think chest up every time you inhale. And you won't actually be able to move your chest very much under load, but the action of thinking chest up, shoulder blades together will help you keep that arch maintained throughout the set.
Yeah, great. No, good advice there, because when you do take that breath, when you let it out, you have a tendency to soften the upper back and lose that arch with your squeeze of your shoulder blades down into the bench. So spotting. So when we talk about spotting here, the spotter does absolutely nothing most of the time.
That's right. Don't touch the bar. Don't do
stand with your crotch over my head most of the time. If you're my wife spotting me, that's fine. Or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, whatever, however you guys, that's whatever. But if you're spotting someone on the bench press, stand back and to the side a little bit, out of their sight vision, okay? Or out of their sight plane. It'd be like if you're standing right in front of me while I'm squatting or deadlifting or pressing, I'm going to ask you to move out of the way.
Right.
Because I've got a gaze point that I'm trying to look at, and it's not you. So I need to be focusing on the bar and its relationship to the ceiling and my return point, and also on where I touch on my chest, not looking at you. Second thing is, do not touch the bar. And Rip talked about this in a video recently.
Right. Rip's got a whole diatribe about this.
Yeah, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but we'll basically say this. Do not touch the bar unless one of three things happens. The client or your fellow lifter says, take it. Number two, the bar stops and there's no movement or progression of the bar. The bar stops. They come down, they touch their chest, and as they come up, the bar stops.
Yeah, and stop does not mean moving slow.
No, because it can move crazy slow.
You've seen some of my PRs.
Painfully slow.
There's a handoff point where the triceps start to take over the lift, and it might slow down on a heavy attempt right there.
Yep.
Don't touch my bar, because I'm going to get it.
Right.
I'm going to get through that point.
And don't watch the person. Watch the bar. Watch the very center of the bar in relationship to their chest, and make sure that there's a small amount of movement of the bar coming up over their chest. So number two, if the bar completely stops, and then definitely number three, if it changes direction.
Right.
If it starts to go back down a tiny bit, boom, take the bar. Now, when you take it, lifter on the bench, do not let go of the bar.
Right.
You have not finished your lift. Your job, that is your load, you get that bar back into the rack. But spotter, don't help. It's a spot. It's an assist. It's not a lift.
Right.
You shouldn't have to be upright rowing that bar back into the rack.
That's right.
Just gently help them with both hands. You can use a mixed grip, an overhand grip, whatever you want to do. Gently help them from the center of the bar inside their grip. Gently, slowly help them up. Let them do the work to get them back into the rack. Elbows locked out, and pull it back into the rack. If they make the lift, they have a 5-rep set, let's say. You're just standing right there behind them, waiting for them to finish their set. Then you, when they go into full lockout on the last rep, you just pull the bar back into the rack. To help them out, you do the same thing. They get ready to come out of the rack. 3, 2, 1. Have a command system too.
Yeah, I like to count down. I'll tell them I'm going on the count of 3, 2, 1. Yep.
That's exactly what I do. When I'm in a gym and my wife's not spotting me and someone else is spotting me, I'll just say, hey, can I get a spot? And here's what I would like for you to do. You know, that's a courtesy to the spotter to begin to develop a communication system. They could save your life.
Right.
If there's a problem with the the equipment or let's say it doesn't have safeties or something else, and if you're doing a 3-rep heavy set or 5-rep heavy set or a single, they could save their life. So that's worth a little time to communicate first and say, hey, I'm going to say 3, 2, 1. When I say 3, 2, 1, if you will help me out of the rack, that means just lift the bar with me up over my shoulder. I'll do most of the work. My elbows will be locked out. I'll do my 5-rep set. At the end of it, I'll go to full lockout again, and then you can pull me back into the rack. And you could also talk to them about how to spot if they don't have a lot of experience spotting. Ask them, do you feel comfortable spotting a heavy load? Just be honest with them. Courteously, you're working together in a community, so work together on that process. Yeah. So, man, I love the bench. I just now, probably in this last year, started benching again. As you know, I close grip bench.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
One of the modifications.
Yeah, so let's talk about maybe some ways like that. Let's just say that you've tried this technique and it really bugs your shoulders or your elbows.
Yeah.
And or maybe you just can't get in that arch position.
Sure.
Some people may not have the flexibility to truly arch their upper back. So what do we do in that case?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of modifications that we make. We can incline bench people. If we need to.
Okay. Yep.
That's one thing we can do.
That kind of turns the movement somewhere halfway between a bench press and a press, right?
That's right. And so we could incline them a little bit if they have a little bit of shoulder pain. Sometimes that sometimes can put a little bit more stress on the shoulders, but sometimes the position changes enough to where it's not as painful. The other thing we can do is change the grip. And in changing the grip, we can narrow the grip. I would never widen the grip, ever. That just decreases the mechanical advantage and puts more stress on a shoulder that a shoulder might be hurting.
That's right.
I'm not going to go out past a normal grip width. Now, if you're a competitive bench presser, I get it, but there are standards there on where your grip has to be anyway.
Right.
So I would say that the narrow grip for me really helps to isolate more of a lat and lower chest and tricep recruitment and takes some of the stress off the shoulders. The range of motion can actually be a little bit decreased too, because when you arch back, the highest point should be closer to the bottom of your chest, not your chest.
Right, right.
So you're bringing the bar to the same position, but you're actually bringing the bar down a little lower because you're arching back more and you're at a narrower grip.
That's right.
And so I like the narrow grip just because it decreases the stress on the shoulder. It brings the elbows down. Basically, that's the big thing too.
Right.
It brings those elbows down away from the shoulder height, so it clears even more impingement. Now, if you have a ragingly painful long head of the biceps, the close grip might kill you though.
Right.
Because it can hurt the long head sometimes.
Yeah, so if you've got maybe some tendonitis going on because of improper squat grip, the bench press might be, and in that case, sometimes I'll have people that are really dealing with that biceps tendonitis just lay off the bench for a couple weeks altogether. We'll just press instead and just let that dissipate a little bit. I've had a little bit of success with people who have cranky elbows that just, like non-specific elbow pain. I'm not talking about tendonitis really, just kind of one elbow hurts one day and then it's the other one the other day. I've had some success with close grip benching. Yeah. If your elbows bug you with a standard grip. Yeah. And I'm not sure exactly what's going on there mechanically, but
probably a lot of eccentrics. A lot of eccentrics on the tricep improves that tendon health. The lowering of that bar really improves that tendon health and actually feels pretty good. Yeah. And on something like that, I might do a couple of real heavy sets and then some back off sets. But I want the heavy set to grow that tendon. Sure. And to get lots of blood flow in that tendon. The other thing we might do is block press. We might actually add a block on their chest, which we haven't done a whole lot of here because our lifter population is very general. We don't have a lot of competitive lifters, and most of our people stay pretty healthy because of the way we program and train. But I might use a block. I might use, a 2x6 or a 2x4 or a block, a specific like a rogue block or something.
Yeah, that you place on the chest.
And shorten the range of motion. If it's too painful for their shoulders to go down all the way to the chest, we're just using a restricted range of motion, just like we would if we have someone squat a little high to a bench or to a box, or if we do rack pulls, that's a shortened range of motion deadlift. So right. And that kind of leads us to what we're going to talk about next episode. Yeah, we're going to talk about more accessory lifts,
accessories.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about maybe some adaptations to primary compound lifts. Like a rack pull could be considered accessory lift, but it's really a deadlift, just in a shortened range of motion.
Yeah, some people
we'll clarify that.
Yeah,
assistive
absolutely.
Lifts or adapted lifts, or
that's right. So we try to, with all of these compound movements, we try to adhere to the model as close as possible and really give it a good try and see if that strength adaptation can take place. But sometimes you get to a point where you're like, this may not be happening for me. So what do I do in that case? So we get a lot of questions like that. We'll talk about that next episode.
Yeah. And hey guys, real quick, 2020 is going to be a big year for 40 Fit and the 40 Fit Nation. We've got some plans here. We've got some things that we'd like to do, but we need to hear from you. The whole reason why I started this 40 Fit, why I started it, I don't know how long ago now, 8 years ago, however long it's been, and then eventually started the podcast with Trent producing it for us and also being my co-host, was to get evidence-based information, logic and reason out to 40 plus aged individuals so that you can train better, live better in fitness, health, and life. But we need to hear from you. We'd love to hear on the Instagram page or on the Facebook 40 Fit Nation page. If you have Facebook, please go over and like our page at the 40 Fit Nation, 40 Fit Nation. We're going to start creating in 2020 some private logins, some things where if you're one of the 40 Fit Nation, then you can access some information and some community that not everybody will be able to access.
That's right.
And so, but we need to hear from you. We also would love for you to like and share posts. We love your comments on Instagram, on Facebook. Also, email us. I've got an email today that a gentleman from the Oklahoma area just emailed me and wants to talk. So I said, send me your cell number. Let me give you a call. Let's have a quick talk. And if it's something really quick, I don't charge for that. I don't do consult fees for stuff like that. You're part of our community. We want you to be bettered by what we do. We want you to have an improved quality of life. And then in hopes that you will refer us to other people so that we can grow this community. So we want to see 2020 be a big year for us to grow the 40 Fit Radio podcast. We have grown in 2019, but we want more growth. We want to grow more so that we can bring more content, more information, more opportunities for interaction. Maybe 2020 will see the resurgence of what we used to do before, which was the 40 Fit Master Seminar, the Fortify Seminar. We'd love to bring that back, so we're working on some details there. But this is driven by the opportunity to see that there's growth in the future, and that's important because right now we're making no money on this.
That's right.
We do this free.
We
Actually,
spend the money.
We do this as a deficit.
Yeah, that's right.
But that should tell you that it's not all about money to me in growing this. It's about reaching out to the people that mean so much to us. So, yeah, share us, like us. Go to Instagram. You can find Trent there at Marmalade Cream, me at Dr. Deaton, and then our Instagram page is at 40 Fit Radio. If you want to email us, info@40fit.com. Go to our website, 40fit.com. And you can go to the 40 Fit Radio podcast tab and get more information. So,
all right, guys, we'll see you next week. That's it.
Next week. Accessories. Bye-bye.